I kind of divided mine into resumes and cover letters separately. So with resumes, we're reviewing many resumes, and there's really, unfortunately, not one format that's better than another. And there's different types of personalities, different people that are looking at them. So that's the bad news as far as formatting and what to use and what not. But easy to read font is very important, and that it's formatted so that it's easy to read, clean, easy to see where the information is, what you're trying to get across. Proofread it. I still see misspellings and grammatical errors even in resumes from time to time. So have somebody else look at it would be wise. Something new I've been seeing is sometimes people put their pictures on their resumes, and I would probably recommend not doing that. It just protects your identity, and it's just odd. So it's good to stand out, but that might not be one way you'd want to stand out. Make sure your dates that are on there are very logical. I'm looking for someone's history, what they've done, and how that relates to the position we're hiring for. So I want to be able to see, basically, I want to see what your story is. So it's the dates need to be clear, easy to see, and in some type of logical order, either typically from what you're doing currently going backwards is the way it's easier for me to look at it. And then, of course, your education, relevant work history, job responsibilities. That's the information that we're looking for on the resumes. So for cover letters, we're looking at dozens of cover letters that are saying the same thing. Want a job, this is who I am, a little bit about myself. So how are you going to stand out? This is your opportunity to kind of put a little bit of your personality into it, but don't go over the top, because I've seen those too, and it's kind of a turnoff. So proofread also. This is where a lot of proofreading is crucial, grammatical errors. Make sure you have the right library name on there.
Do that.
And the right address. We understand you're probably applying to more than one place, but don't make your cover letters cookie cutter, because it will show. And that's where those errors can occur when you don't have it addressed to the right people. So it's your opportunity to put yourself. So I kind of did some do's and don'ts. Research the organization in the library. Use the job announcement to your advantage. Use the language that's in it. And align your background to the goals of the organization. If they have a strategic plan, look for it. See what's going on. What have you done? How can you align your background and experience to what that library is doing? Let's see here. Oh, another thing with the cover letter that we use is we're looking for your writing ability. Librarians do a lot of writing, blogs, internal, external communication. So use that. What do you know about us? And again, your background and how it fits in our organization. That's kind of what I had.
Well, that's excellent. Do you want to add anything, Angela? Because I could really piggyback on a number of things that she said, but Angela, since you're still public.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Okay.
I worked more on the interview part.
Okay,
so, yeah.
Well, I certainly want to piggyback on what Melanie said about proofreading. I've been on a number of screening committees, and I think I can honestly say every single screening committee that I have been on, there has been at least one, and sometimes more than one application where the first sentence was, I'm applying for this job, and it was not our job, and it was not at our institution. So I shouldn't be surprised, and I debated about even saying that, because I'm going to sound like your old high school English teacher or your mother saying, proof your, but that's really important. And I can tell you there is nothing that will put you at the bottom of the stack than to have a glaring typo, or to have, I'm applying for your job and it's not at our institution. And that has happened at I think every single screening committee that I've been on. So that's a frequent occurrence. So before you upload or send or lick an envelope to send something, check it one more time. It just needs to be checked. Usually screening committees have anywhere from maybe 4 to 6 people for an entry-level position, and maybe more, and probably more than that, at least in our institution, maybe more than that for a higher level. And there will be some people on the committee, if they see a typo, that is it. They're not even going to read. That's it. Stop, dead. There will be other people in the committee who may be more charitable, but for the most part, you're dead in the water. So I just can't emphasize that enough, that it's very important to have your cover letter and your resume accurate. And also Melanie said, I think that the cover letter is really critical. I've seen cover letters that come in that say, well, you can see from my resume that I have a lot of experience and skills for this. And it's kind of like, so you go figure it out. The cover letter is to connect those dots and to tie those loose ends together. So yes, your resume may list the jobs that you've had, but how is that relevant? Why do I care? Don't make me figure that out. Spell that out in your cover letter. Make that easy to read. And Melanie also said, and I totally agree, that almost every job description for a librarian says they must have good communication, oral and written skills, and the cover letter is a way we evaluate your written skills. So take advantage of that opportunity to write me a nice letter. Tell me about yourself. Why do I want to hire you? How are you going to complement our staff? Why do I care about you? And I sometimes tell students that the cover letter and the resume are like the little windows that we can see you through. And give me a nugget that I want to jump on, maybe during the interview. Oh, you did that? Let me ask you about that. That intrigues me. I want to ask you more about that. So if you can drop a nugget in your letter about a project that you've done, it might intrigue me to want to get to know you more or get to know about your activities that you've done. So that is a way to write your cover letter. Let me see. Also on your resume, this is a thing that I look for. If you have had more than one job in the same organization, particularly if one job is a promotion, be sure that is clear on your resume. I've seen some resumes where they've just put a bullet and it looked like a different job, and I look at it more carefully and I say, oh, that person worked here as a student worker, but then they got a job in a staff position. That is a promotion. That says a lot about you. That tells me that the institution or the organization, it doesn't have to be an institution, but whether it was Dairy Queen and you started out as a fry cook and then you got promoted into some other position, that tells me that institution thought well enough about you that they put you in a higher position, and that is significant. I look for that. So in a resume, if you can make it clear that you had perhaps more than one job at the same institution and one is a promotion, be sure that's clear, that I can see that, because that is a very significant thing. And even if it may seem irrelevant to what you're applying for, I think the fact that you got a promotion from an institution is something that is worth noting. By the same token, you don't have to put every single thing in your cover letter and spell out every single thing that you've done. I think you've read this before and you've heard this before, but every cover letter should be tailored to the job that you're applying for. I say that with very strong conviction, that you need to read the job description. What words do they use? What verbs do they use? You use those same verbs in your cover letter or in your resume and make it match as close as you can to the job description, because I tell you, the screening committee may have a rubric and they've gone through the positions, not always, but I've been on some where we've gone through the position description and we've listed every required duty, and we've had a number. Okay, they get a 4 here, they get a 3 here, and so as close as you can align your cover letter and resume to the description, the position description, the better off you will be. So if you have experience that might seem irrelevant, for this job, you may not need to list it, but for another job, it might be better to spell it out a little bit more. I'll conclude by saying I had a student ask me one time who was applying for a job. She said, well, I wrote a paper on that very item in one of my classes. Do you think I should mention that? And I said, I absolutely do think you should mention that, because I would say, no, the topic of your paper is of little concern to screening committees. But in this case, it was spot on to what she was applying for. And I said, yeah, I think you should mention that. Don't give it a lot of real estate, but it shows me that you have an interest in this topic, and it will show the committee, and it might give them an opportunity to ask you more questions about that. And you can show that, yeah, I have had an interest in this particular topic since I was a student in my class, and I wrote a paper on it. So each cover letter and each resume really needs to be tailored to the if at all possible. And I know that's difficult, but I think that you will be better served, and you'll better serve yourself if you do tailor your materials to the job. Yes.
Question.
Yes.
Can a cover letter be like too busy? Like, can you talk about too many things? Do you need to focus more? You know what I mean?
I mean, I would say, yeah, it just depends on what exactly you mean by busy, but some can be, I would say, some can be too long, of course, and some can be too short. That was another thing I wanted to mention was make sure you really do have a actual letter, and don't just use an email as here's my resume, blah, blah, blah about me. That's really not a cover letter. A cover letter really is what we were talking about, tying your skills, your background's experience to the job and how you align with that. I think what you're talking about, maybe just going too much detail, which really would be more for the interview.
Okay.
Is that,
Yeah.
do you think what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Try to touch on too many things.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Don't make a list kind of, oh, this, and this, and that. Just pick out some of the big highlights and focus on that.
Usually they say a cover letter should be about a page, but I wouldn't stress if yours goes over a page. I applied for a job and mine was a page and almost a half, but I wouldn't go much more than that. But I mean, a page is a good thing to aim for, but again, don't stress if it's leads over into another page. That's fine. Yeah.
One of the things I noticed, though, that some people do on their resumes at the end is put references. They put references available upon request. Don't do that. I like the fact that someone's just going to be open with who. I don't want to have to. I mean, you're applying for the job. I don't want to have to ask you for your references, and they should be kind of legitimate references. I mean, I've seen some where it's like, my cousin that I babysat for 3 years, or make sure that they're kind of relevant or something that's going to be, work related or library related, so that we can kind of get an idea about your working experience rather than how you hang out with your best friend.
And, on the same token, though, depending on the type of job that you apply for, I'm sure probably on the academic side, you will be asked for references. Often you submit that as a separate document, and it doesn't hurt to have, to kind of keep a list. And the thing with references definitely is not only should they be people who can speak to your abilities for that position, but make sure they know that they are references. Yes. There's nothing worse than getting a phone call from somebody, from an employer, saying you've been listed as a reference, and you're either having to think back to remember who that person is, or having to take some time to go back and try to review that person's performance, try to remember what it was that they did, how well they did it, things like that. So make sure that you do that even before you start submitting applications. Just a couple of things as I was thinking about while other people were speaking. One of the things that I found successful is to keep kind of a master resume that has absolutely everything on it and has bullet points for every single job duty, all sorts of things. And then what I can do is when I get ready to apply, I can actually go in and I can pare that down, delete a lot of stuff. It's mostly pulling things out that I don't feel are relevant to the position that I'm applying for. And so that way I'm not having to rewrite a resume every single time. I have the Joe's master resume that I can add to as I develop experience, as I do new things, and then I could just pull out the stuff that I feel like a person isn't going to care about. And that makes it really easy. If you are applying, if you know you're going to be applying to lots of reference positions, you can basically kind of create kind of a master reference jobs application, or maybe one that's a little bit more tailored in a formatting sense for an academic position. You want to make it look a little bit more like a CV, maybe, as compared to a traditional resume that maybe you would use for a public library position. It's more of kind of just rearranging the same information. But if you just have that in a simple text document, you can dump that into a Word file, and then you can go in, you can create your headers, put stuff in bold, stick stuff in italics, stuff like that.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask specifically, everyone's been saying resume. I keep a master CV. Is that more of an, like if you're applying to an academic library or a research library versus...
I'm sure the public folks can talk about whether it matters or not. I would say that if you envision yourself staying in the academic world, and especially if you expect to be applying for tenure track positions at libraries that offer tenure, or positions in which scholarship is either required or emphasized or expected in any sort of way, it doesn't hurt. I think I've kind of gone gradually to just keeping mine more as a CV. It really also kind of depends on how much you have to put on there. A CV, you're going to break out sections for presentations, for publications, committee work, things like that. And you can actually go online, you can find good examples of how to break things down and in which order you should have which section, which sometimes can be different than what you would think of as being sort of the logical order of things for a regular resume. It kind of depends on where you're applying, and it depends on what the people there kind of expect to see. I would say if I were applying for a tenure track position, I would try to keep mine looking as close to a CV as possible, just because from there on out, you're going to be expected to keep one in that format.
Yeah.
But,
we get CVs from time to time. When they're long. And when we see publication, that means really not a whole lot to us, that information. It's not going to hurt,
Right.
but we're not going to look at it as closely, to be honest.
So, and that really is just not even academic versus public, but just research library versus access.
Yeah.
the only other thing that I would say just in general for cover letters and resumes is I kind of take the approach of a resume and a cover letter. I kind of look at these things in stages. And the resume and cover letter, if you think about those as being the things that will get you the first interview, then that's what you should include and that's what you should emphasize. The job of the initial application is to get the people on the other end to schedule a phone call with you. And from there on out, and I'm not saying to exaggerate or do anything, put anything on there that isn't true, but when you're thinking about the things that you want to emphasize, you want those people, that committee or that hiring manager to look at that and say, this is a person who looks like I would like to, have a conversation with. And then from there on out, then as you move on, that first interview then is going to be what determines whether you get that second interview. So think about it in those terms. Think about using it as the way just to get that first phone call. And sometimes that means holding back a little bit, including the things that are going to catch the people's eye. Don't overload them with information. Don't go crazy with all sorts of, every single accomplishment or thing that you've ever done. Kind of just pique their interest.
It is the first impression.
Yeah.
And I can't stress enough what Joe was saying there about not exaggerating. Anything you put on that resume and cover letter, you need to be able to explain in more depth. I sat through a very painful open interview one time with someone who had written down that she wanted to explore a new field of service more in depth. And when she was asked about it, she was using the buzzwords of the time, and she really didn't know. She hadn't thought about what she would actually want to do, and it was just really painful for everybody to do. So you want to make sure that everything you put on there you can explain in depth and answer questions about. We always have lots of buzzwords in librarianship. It doesn't help to put them in there if you can't explain them and talk about what your interest is. Things. So.
How far back should your work history go? Should it just be relevant work history, or should it?
I would say relevant work history. Yeah.
Okay.
Or volunteer work, or whatever the case may be, for sure.
So how do you define relevant? I mean, we get this a lot too, these questions about, is it library relevant, customer service relevant?
I would say customer service. I mean, we look at that heavily too. Definitely. So we always say retail work, is very relevant to public library. So, yeah. And it depends, I mean, if it's a children's librarian's position, then maybe, if you worked in a daycare or something, that's relevant. So you just have to think about the position and who you're working with and what your audience is if you're in that position as a librarian, and what other activities have you participated in that we could look back on and go, okay, they know how to talk to families, or, yeah.
I know you're talking about sort of like having the details on your and telling the story with your work dates.
Mm-hmm.
What if there's a gap because you didn't have relevant experience during that time?
That's what you could use the cover letter to explain.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you part of this wasn't talking about applications, but I know we also have an application, most places do. So that would be a place where you could fill in those gaps as well. So that's another piece that we look at in the process.
And I think, if you do have an employment gap, a legitimate, whether not just positions you don't want to talk about, but maybe you were a stay-at-home mom for a few years, that is fine. But it is good to address that in the cover letter, because people will wonder, well, why did that person, or maybe they were in the military, I don't know. But I mean, that it's fine. But addressing those holes, though, that's tying the connecting the dots that I was talking about earlier. I think it is fine to address that in a cover letter. That would be fine.
We're kind of lucky in a way in that we're in both a field in which for some people, this is sort of, I know for me, it's second career. And so it's one of those things where when I first started applying, I didn't have a whole lot in the library section. So I did need to kind of emphasize what I did sort of in my past life a little bit more. I think for this position, I included, like at the end of my resume, other relevant experience. And because what that showed was that I had kind of progressed from a lower level position up into more administrative positions. It kind of just demonstrates that I was kind of going along a track with more responsibility, things like that. Anything that you can show like that early on doesn't hurt. The other thing that I would say on dates and things like that, make sure you're not shooting yourself in the foot. Make sure, if you think about, say you had on a resume a job you had between 2016 and 2018. If that was January 2016 to December 2018, that's actually basically almost 3 years. If you said 2016 to 2018, somebody might look at that and say 2 years. You want to be able to emphasize, just you don't want to cut out information that would lead somebody to believe you didn't have the amount of experience that you really did. At the same time, the other token is you could also work December 2016 to January 2018, which is essentially a year. So you want to make sure that you are giving people an accurate impression of just how long it is that you've worked. But the other thing also is we've kind of been coming out of an economy in which people have either changed professions or have gone periods without employment. And I don't think it's something that a person should be embarrassed about. I think people really are probably more understanding these days than they were 15 years ago about those types of things. But don't be surprised if you're asked about it. And I'd say just being upfront about it is the way to go.
One thing that I'd like to bring up, which is a little bit on the controversial side, is your online presence. I've talked with our HR person about this recently, well, in preparation for this, and as screening committees here in our library, we are advised by our HR person not to Google a person, not to look for an online presence, because why would that be? Well, there are a lot of lawsuits out right now, many lawsuits where a candidate has sued an institution for a hiring practice based on data that was obtained through social media. You know, maybe the person has a disability. Maybe the person is wearing a hijab who's Muslim, or maybe the person has a small child. Those kinds of things are, it's illegal to not, you know, those are not things we make hiring decisions on, but you can find out easily through social media. So I said to our HR person, I said, well, I know that you tell screening committees not to do that, but everybody Googles everybody. I mean, that's just the way it is now. It happens. So my advice to you is, and I know that the CISLT is now making you do a portfolio, which I think is wonderful. My advice to you is get your LinkedIn up to date, up to snuff. If you have a web page or a portfolio, an online portfolio, make that sharp, make it, you know, you can put things in there that you might not be able to put into a cover letter because you have more space. You can show off your technical ability. And there are articles out there about how to optimize your Google Plus settings. So if somebody does Google you, they can find you easily. So they're not identified. I Googled my name, which I've done before. There is another Cynthia Cotner who teaches English, which could be me because I've taught English in New Mexico. I mean, the point is sometimes they may Google you. I even found that I found another Erin Niederberger. I thought that's the most unique name. What?
It's called the name in Switzerland.
Okay, well, I thought Erin Niederberger, that's got to be the most unique name because no, it's not. I found an Erin. Anyway, the point is somebody may Google you and not even find you, you know. So my suggestion is, even though we are not, as a screening committee, we are not supposed to Google our candidates. I would advise you to have your online presence clean and sharp and, you know, ready for somebody to look at. And in fact, if you have a good portfolio, you might even include that in your contact information. You know, you have your name, your email, your phone number, and there is your how to get to your portfolio. I think that would be a good thing to do because people are just going to Google you. And in addition to the screening committee, we have our interview process involved with, there's a part of the interview, which I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but there's a part of the interview process where you give a presentation and the entire library staff is invited to listen to you. Those folks have not been briefed about the proper way to conduct an interview necessarily. They may not know that Googling a candidate is not considered appropriate and they may do that. So I think we know, I know that graduates now from CISLT are very technically savvy, and my advice to you is make sure that your social media presence and your online presence is a high quality. Yes.
I'd like to add to that, not from this library, but a previous job I worked, there was a situation where a candidate we were considering had on social media put that we were their second choice and that they were going to interview at their first choice. And of course, even if your search committee doesn't see that, another colleague might. Library world is a very small world. So if you are commenting about your job search on social media, I would actually just not do that.
I would not do that either.
I recommend not
yes.
saying when you're going to an interview
right.
or any of those things, just because you don't know
Right.
how that will necessarily.
Well, on the other side, we're not to discuss who we're interviewing either. So it's kind of a two-way street. You know, we shouldn't be out there saying who we're interviewing, or, you know, that's confidential information as well. So, yeah.
So, as someone who lives on social media, like I don't have my last name associated with my Twitter, but Special Collections retweets me.
Right.
I live on Twitter. I have a ton of friends there, and I have a ton of library contacts there. For something like hiring, would it be best to just like try to use my professional presence, like website, LinkedIn, as a smokescreen, and like just maybe set my Twitter to private while I'm job searching?
I think that would probably be a good idea. Yeah. Yeah.
Like the library community on Twitter is amazing. And so I'm friends with a ton of librarians. And I've thought about making a professional, like exclusively professional Twitter handle, but a lot of my friends are also librarians. And it's so hard to separate these days.
Yeah. It really comes down to how you feel, you know, about your presence, and just I think more than anything, just realizing that it is something that somebody could see. If it's something where you look at it and say, there's nothing that I'm saying here that I'm ashamed about, there's nothing that I'm saying here that I feel is wrong, then I would say just, you know, either keep doing what you're doing, or if you feel like you need to have sort of a temporary, hey folks, I'm going private for a few weeks, that's probably I would say maybe that's the best way, because some people, they have their one account and they're very vocal, and, you know, library Twitter can be a very political place. And some people don't have a problem, you know, saying, this is who I am, this is my profession, these are my beliefs, this is who I supported in the election, stuff like that, and just view that all as a whole, you know, part of their total package. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. I think that it's just a matter of, there could always be the chance that somebody looks at that and form an opinion. And then the question sort of is, the way I think of it is, would I want to work for somebody who would, you know, judge me based on this sort of stuff? And that's sort of the thing you have to ask yourself as well.
And LinkedIn really is a thing.
You know, I don't know that it is that much.
I don't have one.
Apparently, for some disciplines, for some professions, it is a thing, because there are headhunters who go and look in your LinkedIn. I don't think that's true in the library profession. You know, the library profession, we are much more passive in our, we wait for you to apply to us. We usually do not go out looking for applicants. There may be a few exceptions, but for the most part, we just sit here and wait for you to apply. And then you have to convince me that I want to hire, you know, that I want to interview. So we are much more passive than some disciplines where they are aggressively looking for people and looking on LinkedIn. So I don't know that LinkedIn is the biggest thing, but I don't know about that, but I do know you have a portfolio, I think, right? So I would really make sure that is really high quality, and I would point to that if you feel comfortable doing that in your job interview. I mean, it is impressive to see some of the things that, I mean, some of the older librarians like myself, that is very impressive. Like, oh, look at that, they come out of graduate school knowing that. So that is like, you know, wonderful. So I think that is to your advantage, and I think it just directs people to your professional social media presence, which is where you want to direct them. So
I'll say that on LinkedIn, I actually have used it to follow, more or less look at where is somebody now and would they be interested in coming back. You know, someone who went on, got their degree, went somewhere else, who were looking for a librarian position and knew they were a great employee before, would they be interested in coming back. So it was a way for me to reach out to them. I don't know that I would have done that on Facebook or Twitter, but on LinkedIn, we were already connected. So, oh yeah.
I have kind of an off-topic question, but it's related specifically to the interview itself. I know that, like, now that, you know, times are changing, I guess. I've always been used to, like, going to an interview being very dressed up, looking very professional. But I know a lot of people that go to interviews very relaxed, very laid back. Like, I'm almost a little surprised how people dress nowadays, I guess. And I was just wondering, like, is that something you guys look at still? That's what I thought, but I just want to know, you know, what is that like today? So.
We look at dress, and if you kind of look sloppy or a little too casual, if I look at it as if you can't tell that you're here for an interview, or if you're here to just have a cup of coffee, or, I mean, that's probably not a good example, but I wouldn't wear jeans. I wouldn't wear sweats. Yeah, I mean, make it look like you tried to look good that day. Yeah, it matters. It definitely does.
Yeah, I would say so too. Yeah.
It's along with that impression, you know, you dress for the job you want. So I think.
And I think part of the reason is because one of my first jobs was in retail, and when I dressed up, they were very surprised, and they were like, "Why are you dressed up for this?" And I was like, "It's an interview." So after that, I just felt very self-conscious. I was like, I don't know, you know, is there times, you know, and sometimes there are interviews where you do just meet in very casual places. You know, is there a difference in that? Or
I would say for us, I mean, we have had people that have dressed like shiny suits that have come in, and it's kind of like, okay, that's a little much, and it was very distracting during the interview. I meant just for myself. So it is very hard because it also depends on the person that's sitting in the room and what their ideas are on what's flashy or what's appropriate dress. I mean, that it's hard because everyone is different. But I mean, I think that just showing that you woke up and thought about what you put on that day, because there is always time for casual later. If you get the job, you know, then you can learn about the dress code. But if it's possible, you can kind of do some research and get online to see what the dress code for the place you're applying at, if that's available, might kind of help you decide whether you're going to wear, you know, I don't know, you know, skirt certain length, or, you know, dress pants, or, you know, 3-piece suit, or to kind of get an idea, so that maybe you should, you know, I don't know. I would say just err on the side of what makes you feel comfortable too. Yeah. That you're not gonna. I mean, it's sad that someone kind of questioned you on that, because I would never make a remark about an applicant's clothes, at least to their face. I mean, you know, that's them. I mean, seriously, because that's just opening a whole awkward thing right off the bat. So that's sad. I'm sorry that happened.
No, it's fine. But you know, now that, you know, I would say, you know, I feel like with our generations now, we're more open to things. So I'm just not sure. You know, I do know people that do go to job interviews that are wearing, you know, jeans, stuff like that, and they get jobs. So I'm just kind of surprised. You know, I don't know what's the norm anymore. So.
Yeah, I mean, that is kind of hard, because you never know where you're going in. You haven't met the people. Yeah. But I would say, you know, just nice slacks or something it's business casual.
It seems a level of respect for the interview.
Right.
So that's how I would gauge that.
Is this the sort of thing like social media? Don't try to be someone you aren't, but maybe don't be all of yourself all the time.
That's probably a good one.
So like, I was reading, the professors in actually have a lot of great tips on interviewing and stuff, because academia tends to be formal in certain ways and not in others. And so she was talking to a woman who never, like, really not femme at all. And this woman was saying, should I buy like a skirt suit for an interview? I've not worn skirts in 30 years. And her point was, you're not gonna ever want to wear a skirt again. Wear your suit and tie, just wear a nice one.
Right. Something with academia, I would say, is just, depending on the position, also know that there may be people from outside the library who may either participate on the hiring committee itself, or who might attend presentations that you give, or things like that, sometimes with subject specific positions. You might meet with faculty in the areas where you might be working. What's acceptable in the library once you get outside into faculty may not be quite the norm. I would say it's the one time where I would definitely just recommend err on the more conservative side. Try to be kind of as neutral as possible. I think personality wise, that'll come through in the interview. And it may very well be that, once you get the job, the tattoos can come back out, the piercings can come back, all that sort of stuff. You'll know. And, but I would just say, just go with something maybe a little less daring than you normally would go for. I think respect for the interview is the best way to think about it.
Before we leave the cover letter and resumes part of it, I wanted to ask panelists about what people should be prepared for in terms of response time when they've submitted. Varying from no response to quick response to everything in between. So, how do we deal with that? What do you keep in mind in those situations? At these institutions, what are the, what's the norm?
I mean, typically for us, we usually have a date that we list on the job announcements, like accepting a deadline, so that you kind of know, okay, the deadline is this day, and then we have to have time to look through those applications and resumes. So
a week after would be probably the earliest.
Yes.
And if it's longer than that, maybe 2 weeks, because depending on the number of people that are involved, and they have to look at all of the resumes and applications and review them. But that deadline is a very key date that we have out there. I have people that contact us before, and it's like, we're still accepting applications. So, and that tells me about how closely they're looking at the details of what we put out there as well. So.
Are all applications acknowledged, or is it just if you don't hear from us a few weeks after that?
Our application process is kind of automated online. So as soon as you submit your information, you get an email acknowledging that we received it. And then we, on the flip side, always email everyone after the process is over to notify everybody as well.
And here at Mizzou, we have an automated process too, and so I believe, and Joe would know this better than I would, but I think that when you upload or you email in your application or your cover letter and resume, but then you have this online form to fill out, and I believe it's the HR person sends a thank you, we have received your documents. Whether you've submitted all the documents that are required, I don't know if that's acknowledged or not, but you will get an automatically generated email. The way that Mizzou works, you can go and upload, for example, if you did submit a cover letter with the wrong name, you could easily upload a new one. I, as a committee member, can see, oh, this was uploaded yesterday, or it doesn't, I don't know what the change was, but I could see that an upload was made. So yeah, you do get that. As far as how long does it, on our end, we don't have a deadline. We call it applications will be received until the position is filled, but we do have a date that says screening will begin on such and such a date, which is sort of like a deadline, but it's not stated as a deadline to encourage applicants to continue. Even if that date has passed, we will still be looking at applications. And so we've since changed the word. I mean, it's been a while, but we've changed our wording to encourage applications to continue coming on, even if the screening process has already started. So
just remember that, especially with the universities, there's typically a committee. You have several people who are having to get together and go over things. It's not just one person who can kind of go through things and make their decision. You have multiple people evaluating resumes and trying to come together to decide on who they want to call. I would say in general, don't necessarily expect to hear back. If you don't make the first cut, it may very well be that you don't hear anything until the hire's been made. Some places are courteous enough to say, thanks, but we've made our selections for interviews and chose not to give you an interview. Those are nice because you can have some sense of closure instead of having to sit there kind of for weeks on end wondering, are they delayed because of committee stuff or people are on vacation, or am I not hearing something because they've already moved on and have been interviewing people? So that's always nice to get, but you don't necessarily always get that.
I've always been told to, if you don't hear back, call a week later. Is that still a thing that is allowed? That's what I was always told.
A week later?
Call a week if you don't hear back about an interview after a week, to call them and just see where they're at. Basically.
I wouldn't do it.
Okay.
I wouldn't do it at a week. That seems like that's awfully soon to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just kind of put it in the interviewer's hands.
Yeah, I mean, I get those calls, and I'm kind of like a robot in what I say. You know, I get the deadline. We have it. You know, it's not gonna. It won't hurt or help you. It's more of just, is it worth your time, and are you going to get a hold of somebody? You're going to get a voicemail. Then you're still not going to know what's going on. It just depends on who you're going to get a hold of when you're calling them too, and what information they're able to share with you. So I don't know that it's not necessary. I know some people, I can tell by the way they call that they think this is going to help them. I just want to, or they will even stop by. I just want to put a face to the name, and this is who I am, and it's not going to help you. Or, I mean, it's not going to hurt you either. I'm not going to go and make a note. But it's, right. Well, unless you're doing it repeatedly, then it might be an issue. But yeah, but it's a good question. I feel like that people are told that somewhere, so it's good to hear that confirms that for me.
Other questions about the resume interview process?
This is not a
Resume
serious,
cover letter, I'm sorry.
this is not as serious a question, but you mentioned typos and stuff. Are there like significant library positions on things like the Oxford comma?
No, I don't think so.
Our PR department might have, with their positions, but yeah.
Well, why don't we take a 5-minute break, do some snacks and stuff, and then we'll focus on the interview topics. The Oxford comma would probably cause you debate.
Yes.
I can see a whole hour spent.
I'm not going to get you consensus on that.
No, there will be people who have strong opinions on the committee.
I've sat on a few of those where we debated the placements of.
Buzzwords are just going to change over time. So like, keep on top of trends in the way people are talking and don't use a buzzword from 5 years ago.
Oh, goodness.
We used to have a librarian here. I would always show him mine, and he would take his red pen and make sure.
Add the commas.
And I was like, okay. I don't get the job. I know it's not grammar. All those little things. I'm not unhappy. I'm not on the job market. Does anybody need more to drink? Help yourself to something to snack on?
Lunch, but thanks.
You guys are in the sun here, so it's warm. All those cover letters, the hours spent agonizing over what to wear.
I'm just thinking about the waiting. You submit your application and the waiting, and now being on the other side where you're on the hire, you're like, has it already been that long? We're still waiting to try to all get together to do this.
Yes, the graduate students that work with me, they sit on the search committee that hired their replacement.
Oh, that's right. You mentioned that.
And it's wonderful.
It is good.
Yeah.
Now I understand. This is like just trying to get us together is it's difficult.
Yeah.
Cindy helps me out with that. Usually we end up coming in on a Saturday. We just all meet up on Saturday. And spend all day sitting there doing it. It's like,
Yeah, that's a weird classroom setup.
It's interesting. And then the two screen.
Yeah, I think the two screens is one online.
And it's only Thursday. It's not Friday.
have all your water pumps and all that been solved? Are you guys back to normal?
I know the city's still tearing up stuff around. You know, Walnut, they were working on it this morning, but they were putting concrete down, so that's a good sign.
I'm gonna go to the restroom. I'll be right back.
I saw the
Yeah, seeing all the tweets. Oh my goodness, they're having quite a time. Every day there was something else.
Like we haven't closed for anything. I mean, okay, aside from the fleas and things, but you know, it just seemed like we had this. I mean, I've been there 20 years. We never closed for anything. And then when Melissa was about ready to retire, it was just like we had all these closings. Just, you know, weather, water.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
It was because she never likes dealing with it anyway.
Yeah.
So it was a universe gift to her
Yeah.
for leaving. Yeah. We've been enjoying, yeah, it's just been different.
It's been
And
different.
How long was Melissa?
45. 45 and a half almost.
Wow.
21 instructor.
I believe so, yes. Yeah, because she became director right before I started.
Sometimes I think we have too many
It'll be interesting to see what changes there are.
Yeah, it's like we're going through an internal audit right now.
Yeah, I'm
It
sure.
is,
Yeah.
you know, because when you don't have anybody question things or try to learn what you're doing, it's like, oh, well, I don't know why we do it that way. We just do.
Yeah.
We've been doing it that way forever.
Yeah, we reorganized 2 years ago, and then did a reference retired after 40 years.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah,
this
that's
other
what
was like,
happens.
well, but
Yeah.
this is, we've all just done this, it's just a thing. And
Yeah.
now you want to move us around, it's just like, what?
Yeah.
We're still moving around, we haven't quite got our regular combination right yet, you know? Moving things around again, which is where realign again. New departments.
Ah.
Quite settled yet.
Between
You know, because things are changing.
Yeah.
The old organizations just don't fit anymore.
Yeah.
We're getting there. We just hired Joe in the fall, so we started in August. Head of Instructional Services. All these wonderful things.
So Joe, what was your previous life? You mentioned this is your
Journalism.
Journalism.
I was a J school kid. I worked at newspapers, magazines,
Oh, okay.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
I was working for a real estate magazine that was published by a company that did real estate advertising for newspapers. And so when the market crashed,
Yeah.
I was writing for a magazine about a market that was disappearing, and most of our money for our company was being made placing ads in newspapers that were falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
It was in Chicago, so the Tribune, which was our major client, was being sold.
Yeah.
And so it was just sort of felt like everything was imploding, and I thought I need to like do something else. And
Yeah.
going back to school.
My brother-in-law worked for the Denver Post, so very similar story.
Yeah, you know, it's
and he's here now at the Missourian.
Oh, really?
Part-time,
Okay.
but you know, he was able to. He's old enough. He's kind of retired, but you know, so
Yeah.
he's able to stay in his profession.
That's
but,
cool.
Yeah.
And from us, when
It's just kind of.
I'm just curious how many emails you got from.
I don't remember because I
Yeah.
can't remember if the invitation for the phone interview was by email or phone. I think I got a confirmation it was submitted. My application was submitted. It said and that was automatic, like immediately afterwards. It wasn't even something that Cheryl didn't send it.
No,
It was generated by the system. And then I think from there on out it was all phone calls or direct email.
Just yell your question at me.
And over here, no, don't touch my pen. Don't touch my
Yeah, it's hard. I like whenever possible the moment that we've chosen. I mean, it's always hard because
Where's your manners?
I've been on interview committees before where you call people, you select, okay, we're going to call these 6 people for first interview. And you get there back, it's like, ugh, we need to, or like 3 of them drop out. And it's like, well, do we need to go back? You don't want to notify somebody. And so it's like, I think in one case we sent the last committee I was on in South Carolina, we sent people an email saying candidates have been selected for interviews. However, we were keeping the process open and basically leaving the door open. But kind of also letting them know you have interest in this round. So.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where.
Are you everybody ready to kind of get started? Okay. Why don't we go ahead and start part 2 here? Everybody. So this section we're going to focus more on the interview, what you can expect at a public library interview and an academic interview, some tips to help you prepare, answer your questions, things like that. So, Angela, did you want to start?
Sure. One of the things that Melanie had mentioned earlier is about doing some research prior to coming to the interview for your resume. And it is particularly important to do that as well prior to your interview. There's nothing worse than getting into the interview and not knowing anything that they do at the library and kind of like, oh, you do that. It's like, yeah, you can always tell when an applicant has not done their research and try to align your credentials with what the library is going on. We spend a lot of time preparing for our interview, and we would hope that our candidate would invest as much time on their end as well. And most libraries have an online presence so that you can get in there and you can kind of get to see some of the events that are going on. What does the library do? What seems to be their main focus in programming, or what is their vision or their mission statement? Looking at maybe their collection development plan if it's online. Looking to see that they're governed by a board of directors. Those things are very important. So you know that when you come in, you have 3 branches and you have, bookmobile services. Knowing those things just kind of gives you an idea of where you're going to work if you get hired. So it's nice to do that. Also check social media. See what's going on. That's a good clue too, especially if you're saying you're on social media a lot. We're tweeting and putting things out on Facebook of what we're doing, so kind of being in the know. So familiarize yourself with that. And then some of the things that maybe you can expect is that when we schedule an interview, at least at our library, we call people to schedule an interview, and then once we make that connection and schedule, we email the full job description to them of the things that are expectations for that position prior to the interview, so they have a chance to familiarize themselves with the details of what that job is going to entail. When we do an interview for a professional position, there could be 5 people in the room interviewing at any one time. So that can be kind of intimidating to walk in a room and there are 5, 6 people all there waiting to interview you. That can be intimidating, but kind of prepare yourself for that. We do some of the questions that we ask in the interview. We ask about the Library Bill of Rights, the ALA Code of Ethics. We ask about your working style, like how you work, what works best for you, and maybe some questions about how you might help your situation if you don't get along with a coworker. Kind of those interpersonal connections, how you make those, as well as like your customer service. What are some of the things that you can do to what customer service means to you? Mm-hmm. One of the big ones that we ask people is what mistakes have you made and what have you learned from them? And I think that kind of thinking about that before going into an interview, because sometimes it is hard to think about those things. You know, you make a mistake, you usually kind of want to forget about it. But we like to see how people can reflect and make something good come out of a mistake that they had. And I think that one of the things where people are like, well, you know, I don't really make mistakes. That kind of tells me that you don't take a chance on some things that you just maybe not put yourself out there to do those things. How you deal with a difficult customer. You know, we're, at least in the public library, we are facing the public. You never know who's going to come in. And I'm sure academia too. You know, you have people that come in, but you just never know what you're going to get. So how you're going to deal with those difficult customers. We also give scenarios. So we will, and the scenarios that we give are just little scenarios of maybe something that happens. It's not to trick you into thinking or trick you into like, oh, you don't know our policies, but it's kind of a way for us to gauge your gut reaction and how you break things down and how you would deal with it. With our librarian positions, they have a lot of responsibility as far as like being the floor managers at our library. And so we want to see how you can deal with those things that may come out of left field that you're not expecting. And then if you make it past the first interview, we do second interviews, and there's usually more people in the room. And for that, we sometimes ask for a writing sample. We might ask you to write a blog post for something, maybe do a review of a book, or because we do that a lot. We have blog posts on book reviews, or maybe plan a program. You need to plan a program for adults. What are you going to do? And we like to see the scope and how people think and what they think they can do. So those are some of the things that you can expect.
Mm-hmm. Angela, how long do your interviews last? First ones and second ones?
For our professional interviews, the first one can last an hour to an hour and a half. Mm-hmm. The second interview might last longer. In our second interviews, in the past, we have had maybe our director or associate director in there because it's a professional position and they kind of want to know, you know, who's coming on the professional staff and get to know them. And sometimes they go off topic. We usually have lists of questions. They will go off topic and just maybe have you explain something more, or be like, so what if this happened? And that second interview, we usually schedule, is it like 2 hours? Is it an hour and a half, 2 hours?
Yeah. Because more than half of the people in the room have already met with you.
Right.
So there's a more familiarity there, but we have new people that haven't. So it really can go, it could be short, it could be long. It just kind of depends. And it has no reference as far as how well or not well you're doing either. So, yeah.
Are your first interviews typically in person or over the phone? Okay.
Yeah.
In person.
We've only done one via Skype.
Okay.
And I mean, it was okay, but yeah, we haven't run across that too much where we've had to do use technology or the phone.
Yeah. All right. So I've had the luxury, I guess, of being on both sides of this a few times. I've served on hiring committees for tenure track librarians and for staff and paraprofessionals. But also, obviously, I started this job in August, so I went through the interview process here. First thing, this is a plug of a book that I have found extremely helpful over the last few years. It's called How to Stay Afloat in the Academic Library Job Pool by Teresa Neely, Neely. We have a copy of this here at Ellis. We have an ebook copy, and there's at least one more copy in Mobius. I bought this book, an ebook copy of this, while I was still in library school, because I just kind of wanted to have a sense of what I was getting into interview-wise. And it was written by some librarians at the University of New Mexico. I ended up interviewing with the University of New Mexico and interviewed with people who wrote this book. So at least I kind of knew what to expect from them. It's a great book just in that it walks you through the entire process from starting your job search all the way through job negotiation. And what I found is that my experiences interviewing at different colleges and universities tend to align pretty closely with what they talk about. And they're pretty no nonsense, and they explain things from kind of the applicant side, but also the committee side. So I would encourage you to check that out. I will be returning it as soon as I get out of here so that somebody else can check it out. What you have to understand about the interviewing on the academic side is that it's typically a long process, and in most cases, especially universities, research institutions tend to follow kind of the same process. Typically, there are going to be a couple of rounds of interviews. Typically, the first round of interviews are done by phone or by Skype. I've worked at places where we tried to stick to phone. I've worked at places where we really like to do Skype. I've worked at places where we didn't really care one way or another. Where I just came from, we liked to make sure that they were all the same so that every person had the same exact experience. It's just going to kind of depend institution to institution. But that first interview, what will happen is you'll receive an email or phone call from somebody who's on the hiring committee. It may not be the committee chair. It may just be somebody on the committee, but you'll be contacted and asked if you want to have a phone interview or Skype interview. Depending on where the institution, it may be anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. It's good to know how long that will be, because that will kind of dictate how long your answers should be and how much time you will have to ask questions. So make sure you get that information as quickly as possible. Typically, your interview will be with a committee. So you will be on the other side of the phone or camera from a room of anywhere from 3 to 7 people. And usually the way that goes is that committee has developed a set of questions, and they just go around in a circle. Round robin. Somebody has question number 1, and then they just go to the left or go to the right. And those will be the questions that they ask every single person that they interview during that phase. After you've been through this a few times, you'll learn that there are questions that are asked over and over and over. And it doesn't hurt to go ahead and develop good stock answers for them. You need to have a good answer developed already and ready to go for what interests you about the position. You need to have a good, quick elevator pitch for, a little bit about your background. But when you talk about your background, make sure you're talking about things that are kind of tie into the position. Don't give a whole long drawn out biography of, you grew up here and you did this and you did this and whatever. Keep it pretty simple, but make sure it somehow ties back to the job you're applying for. You probably need to have a good answer for questions like the sort of like dealing with a difficult patron, or dealing with a time that you've had like a conflict with a coworker. Things like that. They're going to be those sort of interpersonal questions that you're going to get, and you might as well have a good answer. Make sure it's an honest answer. Don't make up a story just to have an answer, but you need to think back so that, because those are the types of questions, if I'm on the committee, I expect a person to expect those, and there's nothing worse than asking that question and having a person sit there for 30 seconds trying to come up with something. It's sort of like one of the things that I want to see as an interviewer is this person prepared? Have they anticipated the types of things I'm going to ask for? If they haven't, it's not the worst thing in the world as long as they give me a good answer, but I also kind of feel like that should be something you should be prepared for. And if you're not, it kind of makes me wonder how well prepared you'll be for the rest of the interview. That's just kind of where I come from. You will be asked kind of a mix in that first round of the sort of general interpersonal questions and kind of general educational and work history, maybe combined with a few situational questions or questions that are more directly related to the position for which you're interviewing. I've interviewed primarily for reference and instruction positions, so typically I'm going to face a question at some point about my background with instruction, kind of how I keep up with topics and issues related to instruction. What I know, since I was interviewing a lot while the framework for information literacy was being developed, I was often asked questions related to that. How familiar are you with the framework? Things like that. I came to kind of expect those questions and have an answer for those. I always encourage people to make sure that you have questions to ask.
Absolutely.
Because typically you will be given time at the end of the interview to ask those questions. Don't ask questions that you can answer yourself by looking online. Ask legit, genuine questions that you have about the position, things that aren't clear from the job description, questions about the workplace. There are some questions that you got to ask that you're never going to get good answers to. You know, tell me what a typical day is in this position. If it's a brand new position, they're going to say, I don't know. We just created this position. This person's going to be the first one that had it. Or you're just going to get a kind of a generic, well, every day is different sort of answer. You know, keep your questions to things that people actually can answer. It doesn't hurt to ask questions kind of about what the library's expectation is for the position, background and history of the position, responsibilities or duties that maybe aren't addressed in detail, things like that. First interview is not the time to discuss things like salary. The only time that I would ever tell somebody to ask questions about salary, really in either interview, but especially in the first interview, would be if you've applied to a position that you're really interested in, but they did not post any salary information. I have worked at 2 libraries in which the policy of the institution as a whole was not to include salary information. The only line that they would have is salary commensurate with experience, which does not help anybody, but it especially doesn't help a new librarian. And I don't think that that's fair. I don't like that policy. I think that this is just me soapboxing for a little bit, but at my last place of employment, we had a policy, since we were not allowed to include it in the job description, that when we contacted people to invite them for first interviews, we went ahead and told them what the starting salary was for that position. That was our way to work around it because we didn't like that policy. And so we said, you know, we'd like to have an interview where I'll send you the full position description, and our starting salary for this position is X. That way people know. I think that it's only fair for an applicant to know exactly what it is that they're getting into, and not have to go through the entire process and then find out that they're being interviewed for something that's $20,000 less than what they realized. So that's your first interview. And it's awkward. There's feedback, there's noise on the other end because people are on speakerphone. But that's typically how it goes. If it's on phone, try to find a landline. If it's video, try to, again, use a wired connection that's strong. Nothing is worse than being in an interview and having a call dropped. It just makes things really hard. It's really embarrassing. Try to go find a quiet place so that dogs aren't barking in the background, doorbells aren't ringing, things like that. If it's a video interview, doesn't hurt to pretend like you're going in for a real interview. Go ahead and, even if it's just like what they do on TV, just wear a shirt and a tie and you have shorts on, whatever. Just, it doesn't hurt to actually go ahead and dress up a little bit. Nobody's going to be impressed one way or another by the bookcase back behind you. So, just find a place where you're comfortable. So that's that round. And just like I said, the resume and cover letter is kind of an attempt to get that first interview. The first interview is the attempt to get the second interview. And each step along the way, if 8 people are interviewed in the first round, hopefully those are 8 people that at that point in the process, the committee has decided any of these 8 people might be good qualified candidates based on what we know so far. If you make it to the next round, it's probably going to be anywhere from 2 to 4. 3 is probably in a lot of cases you try to shoot for 3 finalists. At that point, that's sort of the committee hopefully deciding that at that point that these are all 3 people that they could envision having this position, and that at that point it's really just a matter of trying to determine the person who seems to be the best fit. In academic world, second interview is typically a day long. You will show up at 8:30, 9 o'clock, and you'll go till 3:30, 4:30. And it is a full day, and it is exhausting for everyone. It is exhausting for you. It's exhausting for the people who are having to escort you around, take you to lunch, all those sorts of things. You have to make special scheduling accommodations for the reference desk. All this sort of stuff is going on. It's one of these things that, trust me, the committee doesn't like it any more than you do. We're all just trying to get through it. But it's a great opportunity to get to know everybody. And in the academic world, you will end up getting to know a lot of people. You will probably at some point during the day meet the library director or the dean or whatever that position is. And that's typically a short interview. That person typically exists way up here and isn't really involved in the hiring process. And that conversation is always a little awkward because you're not really sure what to say, and just get through it. Typically, you will meet with several committees. You will meet with your hiring committee once, maybe twice. Sometimes committees will split it up so that they have part 1 in the morning and part 2 in the afternoon. Sometimes you will meet separately with librarians from the department that you're working in, because the committee might be made up of librarians from all over the library. There might be a technical services librarian and an access services librarian and reference and stuff. So you'll meet with the department, and that can either be very structured or it can be more of just sort of an open, just everybody hangs out and eats cookies and chats for a little while. You will almost always be asked to give a presentation, and you will be given a prompt, usually around the time that you were invited for the second interview or shortly thereafter. The committee will ask you to give a presentation on a particular subject. And usually 45 minutes to an hour is set aside for that. You usually ask to keep it within a certain amount of time so that the rest of the time can be open for questions. Those presentations are typically open to anybody in the library. So you will have librarians, you'll have staff, you'll have GAs all coming in, sitting in, and listening to the presentation. My presentation was in this room, and so it was, just had lots of chairs in here and lots of people sitting in. That shouldn't be difficult, but it's obviously the part that you'll probably stress over the most, because it's kind of like homework. You're going to have to put together some sort of presentation. You have to think through, you have to practice. You don't have to do a PowerPoint presentation, but I would say if you don't, make sure you have something structured and planned out that you've actually practiced. Honestly, some of the worst ones that I've been in are where people have just shown up and they're just kind of riffing, and it just, or they just have not practiced at all, and it's obvious, and it's just really painful for everyone involved. I would honestly say, as boring as it sounds, unless you really have a really great idea, stick to stick to the PowerPoint on that, you know, and you give your presentation. Typically, there are people who have just questions that they thought of during the presentation. There will be other people who kind of come in with their questions that they're probably going to ask of everybody. Often in those situations, you'll find that there's the person who asks the question that's kind of meant to throw you off guard a little bit, or, you know, make you kind of have to scramble or think on your toes a little bit. It's nothing personal. It's more of just kind of a way to see how you deal with those types of situations. Questions have lots of purposes. Sometimes people are really interested in what it is you have to say. Other times people are interested to see what your thought process is, or see how easily you can ad lib on things. The presentation really is as much to see what your speaking style is like, to get a sense of your personality, stuff like that. Typically, you'll go out to lunch with maybe 3 or 4 people from the committee. Often, you're taken out to dinner either the night before or the evening after your interview's done. So be prepared for that. And yeah, it's just meeting with lots of different people. Questions from the committee tend to be a little more detailed at that point. There may be some questions that sound like repeats from the first call, but they're also going to delve a little bit more into the specifics of the position. Don't be surprised if you get the same types of questions over and over from different people. That's not necessarily by design. It's just that some people aren't in the room at various times and they want to know. So just kind of be used to that, and don't let it frustrate you. You might feel like you're saying the same thing over and over and over, but that's just kind of part of it. So that's really it. You might get a tour of campus. You might get a tour of town if you're from out of town. You'll kind of know all that. You'll have an itinerary before you arrive. Obviously, if you're applying for a job out of the area, typically travel and things like that are covered and dealt with ahead of time. You know, that's one of the fun things, is that typically the university is going to pay to fly you in and put you up in a hotel and all those types of things. So it's fun if you like that sort of stuff. Just hopefully you don't have to do it over and over and over. And then it's done, and you decompress and you wait. And, you know, ideally you hear back pretty quickly, but sometimes, you know, approvals have to be made in certain ways. Often a committee doesn't make the hire themselves. They have to make the recommendation to a person up the chain. And they're the ones who actually have to take a look at the recommendation for the committee and say, okay, it's very rare, but there are times where a library director might turn down or reject the recommendation from the hiring committee. You know, there are things like that happen, but you have to wait for all that sort of stuff to kind of go through before you actually get the offer sometimes. And yeah.
Well, and before we can make an offer to you, or at least before we can announce it, we have to, a background check, a criminal background check has to be made. And so if you're the person who we are looking at, you will know that. But if you're the other 2 people, perhaps, we usually have 3. And if you're the other 2 people who came for an interview, you are waiting and waiting and waiting, because we're not going to tell you you're not number 1, that we are working on number 1 and we are waiting on a background check, and there's lots of hoops. So you're waiting on.
Often during that time is where, you know, if it's really close, maybe that's when references are called. Sometimes a reference might be called just kind of as a pro forma sort of measure, just to say we called a reference. References can sometimes, places call references between the first interview and the second. It really sort of depends on what people like to do. But yeah, so it's kind of waiting, and then you get the call and you get the offer and you get to think about it for a little bit. And I know we'll talk later on another time about negotiation and all that sort of process. Just all I would say on that is just understand that, especially in academic world, don't be afraid to negotiate. It should be part of the process. You shouldn't feel weird about doing it. It's obviously awkward when you're talking to somebody who might be older and more experienced than you about issues of salary and things like that. But we'll leave that for the next presentation. But that's the process, and it takes a while. It can be weeks between the first interview and the second. Hopefully you hear back for an invite for the second interview, within a few days or a couple of weeks after your phone interview. But then it might be 6 weeks from the time that you get invited for the second interview to the time that you actually come. So be ready for it to be from the time you see the ad to the time that you accept the position or start. It's several months, and that's just part of the process. So, yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Do academic libraries hire kind of on a calendar faculty?
It depends. I don't know here if you guys try to keep it to it.
We try to we would like to have people in place by the beginning of the academic year. That's not always possible, but we do try hard to do that.
So year or semester?
Semester.
Season.
Yeah. I would say that's our goal. Whether that always happens or not necessarily it always happens, but that is a goal that we try to do.
And my question was, I know that you're saying this is a hiring process for academic libraries. Would you say this is the case for smaller academic libraries, like community colleges?
Community colleges, I worked at a community college for my first job, and I would say that the process can be faster. We still went through the same process where I worked. We did a phone interview first, and then brought people onto campus and had them give a presentation. Obviously, staff is smaller, so the people in attendance, it's probably, like in our case, it really was just the 6 librarians on staff who did everything. We did the interviewing. We were the ones attending the presentation. We were the ones taking the people out to lunch, giving the tour. It was really just the 6 of us with that candidate in the room at all times. So because of that, it's a little bit faster, cuts out maybe a couple of the extra rounds of things. But what I would also say, though, is that we had some long drawn out searches at that level because this was in Northwest Arkansas. It was a rather prosperous area of the state, very nice area. It was a very nice community college, but it was also an area that had a hard time. We had a hard time recruiting people from outside of the area, and we didn't have a library school nearby. Mm-hmm. So it was difficult to get people who weren't familiar with the area to apply for the job, even when we would advertise nationwide. So we would kind of have to take what we could get as far as applicants, and there would be times where we would have to go through a second round of advertising the job because maybe we just didn't get enough. Some jobs get tons of applicants and you're just overwhelmed and you really have to narrow down. I've been in cases where we didn't get nearly enough, where the ones that we did get just were not what we were wanting or hoping for. And that draws things out just in terms of how long it takes to get the ball rolling. What I think in a lot of searches also, you get people who drop out. In the case of people who are applying for several jobs, my last job I had to accept at a time I got the offer for it while I was setting up travel to go for another interview. It was all just kind of happening all at once. I had to make a decision, do I turn this down or see if I can delay so I can interview with the other place and compare them? And finally just had to make a decision. So private schools, small schools, I would say scale it down, think about the size of the staff, because that's kind of going to be a big part of factor as far as how long it's going to take. The other thing that I would just say is probably in all of our cases, public institutions, there are certain laws that we have to follow as far as the advertisement of ads, the hiring process. We have to hang on to all of our notes and things like that because there are certain things that can be subject to FOIA. There are, in a lot of cases, salaries are public. stuff like that. So there are all sorts of things that we have to do that private institutions and businesses don't necessarily have to go through. So that can kind of bog things down a little bit.
This might be a little too abstract, but it's about the all-day interview process. How do you balance being exhausted with being authentic and, just kind of, I've been playing through the situation hundreds and hundreds of times in my head. I feel like I'm thinking, all day long, meeting so many different people.
Yeah. I think the thing that you can keep in mind, and you tend to realize this in the good interviews, you can figure this out pretty quickly, but just being aware of the fact that it's exhausting for the people on the other side as well. And that the people, if you made it to that point, really what the committee wants is they want to find somebody who they want to work with. Somebody there, you're really hoping that one of the three people you've invited is a person that's really good for the position, because you don't want to have to go through it again. And so the moment that you sort of have that, realize that there's that shared empathy of like we're all kind of in this together. It's not what anybody would really love to be doing, but we're doing it. They're doing it because they need to, but also because they really want to like you. That can be a little relaxing. And so there tends to be that understanding that, hey, the person that we've called in probably is exhausted right now. And I think that the best places are the ones that really build in time for relaxation.
Yeah, I was going to suggest, I've been on a chair, and it is like planning a wedding almost. You have all these things going on. You have people to coordinate and places to be. And I would, if you were the candidate, and I'm going to send you a draft of the interview schedule, which is a day, and probably more than that, because you're going to fly in maybe the night before and leave the day after. But make sure that there is built in that scheduled time, break time. And break time is not always that you have individual break time for yourself, because we build in our schedules break time, but you're meeting with somebody else every single minute of the day. Every time you're with somebody, you are interviewing, whether it's a break, whether it's meal, whether it's walking from here to there, you're talking to somebody, you are on the spot, you are interviewing, so you cannot let your guard down. So it is exhausting. It is absolutely exhausting. But when you get the draft, see if you have some time for yourself. And then you might even ask, especially if you have a presentation to give, if you could have 15 minutes. I had a candidate once who said, right before the presentation, I just got to be by myself. Can you just get me 5 minutes by myself? So it was in this room. So we went over there down around 4011 and just get a grip, get a hold of, she just needed to calm down and, relax. And I think it is fine to say, is there going to be any time for me to just kind of be by myself for just to relax and get a grip, just to kind of relax and be myself. And I think the committee will respect your wish. If they haven't planned that, they should. But it is something that we try to build in. Also, I wanted to say something more about calling references. I feel really strongly about that. And best practices now say you make telephone reference. It used to be, I remember the day when you had letterhead and you got a letter from your reference and it was on letterhead and blah, blah, blah. Now telephone references are best practices. And when we, on the committees that I've been responsible for, again, all 6 committee members were around the table, or if they could be, 4 to 5, talking to the reference. And it was round robin. We had questions that we wanted to ask the reference about the candidate. And so we just went around the table, introduced ourselves on the phone and we had anywhere, it might be an hour-long reference. And so if you have 2 or 3 references for 2 or 3 candidates, that takes some time. But we do that, and we take those. And so people, if any member of the committee were unable to attend the reference, they could listen to the tape if they wanted, but we did delete those afterwards. So, but I just wanted to say to your point, Dylan, about being exhausted, you really do have to keep pressing on because you are on the spot all day long, even during informal social situations. You're still being interviewed. So you have to be careful and on guard and, just professional.
Yeah.
So
Ours are a lot shorter.
yeah. Yeah. And I don't know that, Michelle, you asked about smaller institutions. I've been involved with smaller institutions where we did not have to do a public presentation. So that may be more of a larger academic. I don't know. I really can't speak to that, but I think that perhaps smaller academic libraries may not require the open presentation. That is very stressful, though, to give the presentation.
I have a question more about the public side
Sure.
of things. Like for when you ask for program plans or writing samples, besides good skills or good ideas for programs, what are you looking for in that?
Kind of just the thoughtfulness in the planning, how you might think about maybe the community that you're going to be working in, how you can maybe tie those in. We're really, part of our goals is looking out and how we can make better connections with our community. And so just kind of seeing that from maybe our strategic plan or our vision, just seeing what are you thinking about when you're planning, when you're making that plan, how are you making those connections, and how are you, how you're thinking about that. Because sometimes people will come in and just be like, oh yeah, we're going to do a book talk. Like, yeah, you could do a book talk, but what can you do? So those are the things we're kind of looking for.
In regards to the presentation, and I don't know how much information you could give me about it, but do you know kind of what is entailed in the presentation? Is it very dependent upon the job you're applying for, or is it a very general and broad topic?
I would say they tend to be generally broad, usually, but related to the job.
Yeah.
Joe and I were talking before this about technical services with positions, which a technical services librarian may not be expected to give public presentations very often, but we still ask technical services librarians to give an open presentation, and because it's an opportunity for all library staff to meet them and to see that person. But also a question that we might ask a technical services librarian, one that we've asked before: how do you see technical services changing in the next 5 years? Or, maybe something more specific than that. But, a broad theoretical question where sometimes those are the hardest questions to answer because you have to do a lot of reading to get the big picture. So I would say big picture questions might be more typical, but not always. I mean, not always. It's just, what do we ask? What you asked, Joe?
Mine was about, I was given a scenario. It was basically that I had been asked by a group on campus that was trying to develop a new interdisciplinary program or something along those lines, and was approached about ways in which the library could assist or how I would go about addressing that. And so I had to kind of put together a presentation walking through how I would go about planning I think I had to plan a pitch to them. So I wasn't actually having to pretending like I was delivering the actual proposal to them. It was more kind of walking through what my preparation process would be. But I mean, that prompt was maybe 2 or 3 sentences, and it was very wide open. I didn't ask for kind of follow-ups or do you mean this or that. I kind of tried to interpret it in my own way, although there were times where I thought, do I need to email back and say, do you mean this? So they tend to be pretty open. I would say that often the ones that I've sat in on or that we've given to candidates on committees I've been on tend to be more of the talk about, kind of the current, present, and future of issues related to this position. So if it's an instruction position, talk a little bit about where you see the future of instruction or what instruction in the next 5 years. I would say don't be shocked if you get a question that's sort of that broad. Tell me about the future of this particular topic or position, and you just kind of have to go from there. And
it's like one of your comp questions that you have on comps.
right.
To talk about
some of the graduate students that I've worked with who've asked me for help with their presentations, especially if they're going to a smaller school and they're doing reference instruction. They'll be asked, what would you teach to our entry-level English class, our freshman English class, or our, that kind of thing. What would you, how would you teach them this, or what would you cover in a session for that class?
Yeah.
And then you have to look at their website, figure out what resources do they have, what are the strategies that would teach important for that class or that age, that kind of thing. So some are very specific about, they kind of, very widespread or really specific on things.
And I don't know how it is everywhere, but I know that for a lot of different interviews I've done, the library will even give you a guest account or something like that, so you can actually get in and access their specific set of resources, so that if you are doing a demonstration, maybe if you're applying for a subject librarian position and you're supposed to kind of walk through how you would be teaching, leading an instruction session for a particular discipline, you can actually get in and access Web of Science or whichever database or resources that you would be using, so that you're not just having to sort of pretend or use what's available to you through the place that you're working at right now. So that's always nice. It's handy because it also allows you to kind of get a look to see, how do users interact with the website and how do they get in to the resources that are available there. So.
And in that case, if they're allowing you to go through their website and then log in, everything like that, do you think they're looking for a particular answer in the presentation, or looking at the sort of openness that you have in your presentation to ideas?
I think I've found that typically the committee and the people in attendance are less interested in the specifics of what you have to say and more interested in how you say it. I think that the presentation really, in a lot of cases, is less about, you don't even necessarily have to get it right, as long as you can demonstrate your thought process, demonstrate that you've actually kind of considered the question and are making an attempt to answer the question. And maybe you're showing some creativity in the process. A lot of what people are really interested in are seeing, how comfortable are you in front of this group? Especially if it's a job where you're expected to communicate with patrons a lot, how comfortable are you, in that setting? Like I said before, part of it is having somebody throw you what seems like a little bit of a curveball question. That's as much about seeing what kind of reference librarian you're going to end up being like, as much as anything. You don't think about it in the moment as this is, somebody testing my abilities and, at the reference desk, because you're not modeling reference work at that moment, but it's kind of somebody might be wanting to see how you deal with a difficult or intimidating patron by the way that they ask the question. There's a lot going on, I find, in those presentations. Some of it's very conscious on the part of the committee and the people in attendance. Other times it's just sort of what's on people's minds, because they're thinking about you as a potential colleague. But yeah, I would say that the actual looking for the right answer is probably the thing that's, not quite as much on their mind, or less of a worry. Depends on the question too.
Other questions about the interview process or anything else?
What is the general schedule for, when are the peaks in job applications and job openings?
Well, I would say now, I think as students are nearing graduation, so I would say that you'd probably have a better feel than I, Melanie, because you do this more often than I do. I don't.
We have a certain number of positions that we budget for. And so our positions, professional especially, are really going to become open if one of two things happens. One, somebody leaves, retires, moves away, takes another job somewhere else. Or we've gone through a process, like our strategic planning process, and out of that, we are able to budget and create new positions specific for different projects or different areas that we're focusing on. So we don't have as far as time of year or whatever, it's all over the place for us for professional level positions, definitely.
So coming out of an academic discipline, the job search process starts the year before.
Yeah.
Is this this seems like it's more of like the semester before, or like 6 months before?
Well, I would say we have considered candidates who were within a semester of graduation. I mean, our ad will say must have an ALA accredited, but we will consider candidates that are 6 months out. We will not, or I shouldn't say always, but I've been on a committee where we had one that was a year out, and we did not consider that was too far. But 6 months, it's going to be probably 6 months before. So we would consider. So yes, I would. I would certainly. I wouldn't let that inhibit your search.
I was also just asking, like going on the academic job market, wherever you are, pre or post PhD.
Right.
The job openings for the next year are the year before.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's not. It's usually like a semester before.
You're probably not going to find many instances in which you can have. You're still at your current place and you say, I've got my job lined up and come August, I'm going to go there.
Right.
You might be able to accept it. Let's say if you got an offer in early summer, they'll try to figure out, I think I got my offer early summer. And I started here in August. I basically had the summer to finish up my job, determine how much time I needed between the time I ended my last job and started them. You're not going to find something where you're going to have a job lined up 6 months in advance, where you've been given the offer and you get to go there 6 months down the road or a year down the road. Primarily because a library can't operate like that. They want to get the position filled. They want to get somebody in there. They'll make accommodations for you based on what makes sense with the academic schedule. I think ideally places like to have you there, before the fall semester starts or the winter, if that's the case. But they're also not going to hire you in October for August of the next year. So,
what about for like a public library? How, if say you don't graduate till May, how long are you willing to wait for someone?
We will consider, if it's that semester. Hopefully that answers comps.
Usually, it really is dependent. That's a hard question to answer. But if someone's a month out, that's really hard because depending on the other candidates as well. It really is hard.
And we haven't come across that often enough,
right?
Because our positions don't come open that
very often.
Yeah. More so lately than in years past, but we haven't run across it enough to have that. This is our precedent. We don't have that set up. Yeah. But good question.
Yeah.
And we've had it before.
But we have had people apply that are 6 months out. It's
too early.
It's way too early to take on a professional position when you're 6 months out.
See, and that's not true for us. We would consider, because we probably won't even hire you before the 6 months. It's going to take us that long to fill it. So we would consider you at 6 months out. We absolutely would, but we wouldn't a year out, probably. Unless, it would be unusual if we did.
Well, in that case, what about, for instance, we're graduate assistants, so we're getting a lot of experience years in advance that a lot of other people, maybe 6 months out, wouldn't have that experience. So would you consider that in that case?
The degree is really important.
Yeah.
we have part-time staff who would maybe have just as much experience as a graduate assistant would. So it just depends on, you know, who the other candidates are and what they're bringing to the table as well. Yeah.
Thank you guys so much.